They thought she was only a cleaner, a woman they could insult, laugh at, and forget. Every morning, Bisi pushed her cart down those marble halls, and the rich people who passed her did not even slow down. To them, she was furniture. She was a shadow. She was a pair of tired hands that wiped their fingerprints off the glass and disappeared. Nobody asked her name. Nobody wondered where she came from, and nobody, not one of them, imagined that the quiet woman emptying their trash bins had once signed her name on documents worth more naira than they would earn in 10 lifetimes. So, when Sade, the boss's beautiful young wife, handed her a wedding invitation sealed in gold, everyone in that office knew it was not a gift. It was a trap. A cruel little game designed to drag Bisi to the Grand Magnolia, dress her in shame, and turn her into the joke of the night in front of the most powerful people in Lagos. But the people who planned her humiliation did not know one thing. The woman pushing that cleaning cart once carried a name that built schools, that fed entire villages, that lifted children out of poverty all across this country before a single forged signature took it all away. And when she walked through those wedding doors that evening, calm, silent, and dressed like a queen, not one of them could raise their head. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. Drop it in the comments and enjoy the story. The building was called Meridian Tower, and it stood 26 floors over Victoria Island, like it was daring the rest of Lagos to look up. Glass and steel, a fountain in the lobby that ran all day even when nobody watched it. The kind of place where a man could buy and sell an oil block before lunch and never raise his voice. BC knew that building better than the men who owned it. She knew which elevator groaned on the 11th floor. She knew the stain on the carpet outside the boardroom that no chemical would lift, the one shaped like a sleeping dog. She knew that the air conditioning on the south side ran too cold, and that the woman in accounts kept a bottle of gin behind the printer paper board, and that the marketing director cried in the stairwell on the last Friday of every month and fixed her face before she came back out. People talk when they think no one is listening, and to most of them, Bissy was no one. She was 6 years old. She wore gloves that had gone soft and gray from washing, and she pushed her cart with her head down and her back straight, which is a hard thing to do at the same time, and she had learned to do it anyway. Her hands told the whole story if anyone bothered to read them. Cracked knuckles, a burn scar across the left thumb from a kettle in another life, nails cut short and square, working hands, hands that had carried things. She started at 5 in the morning, before the traders and the lawyers and the oil men came in with their phones already pressed to their ears. She liked those early hours. The tower was hers then, quiet, honest. The sun came up over the lagoon and turned the glass orange, and for 1 hour before the building filled up with people who looked through her, Bisi felt almost like herself. Then the day would start, and she would become a shadow again. There was one person who made very sure Bisi never forgot her place: Saad Adeyemi. Saad was the wife of Dare Adeyemi, the man whose name was on the top floor and on half the contracts in the building. She was 29. She was beautiful in the way that money makes a person beautiful, all of it bought and polished and arranged, and she walked through the lobby like the floor should be grateful. Her heels were always red on the bottom. Her perfume arrived 3 seconds before she did, and her smile, when she gave it to you, made you check your pockets afterward. The first time Sade spoke to Bisi, it was to tell her she was breathing too loud. The second time, she stopped in front of the freshly mopped floor, looked down at the wet shine of it, and said, "Be careful where you put that dirty water. This marble cost more than your whole life. Both your lives, if you have children." Bisi had children once. She did not say so. She swallowed it the way you swallow a stone, feeling it go all the way down. She needed the job. The landlord in Surulere did not care about her dignity, only about the 80,000 naira she owed him by the end of the month. Bills do not knock politely. Bills do not wait for you to recover. so she said nothing, and she moved her bucket, and she kept cleaning. But this particular Tuesday felt wrong from the start. BC noticed it the way you notice weather coming. Sade was sharper than usual, brighter. She had been watching BC all morning with a little smile pressed into the corner of her mouth, like a woman holding a secret she could barely keep. Twice, BC caught her whispering to her friends, those two women who followed her everywhere, the tall one named Joy and the loud one named Mercy, and all three of them looking over and laughing behind their fingers. Around 11, they came across the lobby together. Sade in front, the other two flanking her like a wedding procession that had not happened yet. She was holding something, a small cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy, sealed with a circle of gold wax. She held it up the way you hold up a fish you have caught. BC set down her cloth. She had learned over the years that when Sede came towards you smiling, the smartest thing you could do was put down whatever was in your hands, because you would need them free. BC, Sade said, in a voice gone suddenly warm. Too warm. I have barely seen you all week. Have you been hiding from me? No, Ma, BC said. Just working. Working. Of course. Always working. Sade tapped the envelope against her own palm, slow, enjoying it. Well, I have something for you. A little surprise. Aren't you going to ask what it is? Behind her, Joy was biting down on a laugh. Mercy had her phone half raised, the lens pointed at BC, already recording. BC looked at the phone. She looked at the envelope. She felt the thing in her chest that she had felt 1,000 times in this building, the small hard knot that formed whenever these people decided to make an afternoon out of her. You don't have to give me anything, Ma, she said quietly. Oh, but I want to. Sade held the envelope out. Gold letters across the front, pressed into the paper so deep you could feel them with a fingertip. Dare and I are getting married this Saturday at the Grand Magnolia Estate. And do you know what? You're invited. For a second, BC did not move. A wedding. Their wedding. At the Magnolia, the place she had read about in the newspapers, people left behind in the break room. The place where senators held their daughters' weddings and oil chiefs threw parties that lasted 3 days. People like BC did not get invited to the Magnolia. People like BC were not even hired to wash the dishes at the Magnolia because the Magnolia brought in its own staff from a company in Lecky and would not let a stranger near the silver. She looked at the envelope again, then she looked at Sid's face, and she understood. It was not a gift. It was a trap. Wear whatever you like, Sade said sweetly, and now she let the smile show all its teeth. Just, please, not the uniform. We wouldn't want the real staff thinking you're one of them and handing you a tray. Joy lost the fight with her laugh. It came out of her in a sharp bark, and then Mercy laughed too, openly now, the phone shaking in her hand. Or, Mercy said, maybe she can stay after and help clean up. She's good at that, best in the building, Abby. They laughed together, the three of them, in the middle of that beautiful cold lobby with the fountain running for no one. BC felt her face go hot. She felt her chest pull tight, the old familiar tightness. There was a younger woman who had lived inside her once, a woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind, and that woman wanted to come out now and say things that would end this job in one sentence. BC held her down. She had gotten very good at holding her down. She took the envelope. Her fingers closed around it so hard the paper bent. And she said 2 words, "Thank you." That was all, just that. And then she turned and walked back to her cart, her back straight, the envelope in her fist, while the laughing went quiet behind her because that was not the reaction they had paid for. Sade frowned. The cleaner was supposed to stammer. The cleaner was supposed to look at the floor and mumble and back away, and they were supposed to have a story to tell over cocktails, the funny story of the day they invited the janitor to the wedding. Instead, the cleaner had said thank you in a voice that did not shake at all, and walked away like she had somewhere to be. Strange woman, Sade muttered, and tossed her hair, and went to find someone else to be the center of. Up in the corner of the lobby ceiling, behind a panel that BC cleaned every Thursday, there was a small camera, and 11 floors above, in a room full of screens, a security guard named Victor watched the whole thing happen. He had worked the desk at Meridian for 9 years. He had watched a lot of things happen in that lobby. He had watched a lot of things happen. And Sai. He shook his head slowly and said, to no one, one day, that woman is going to surprise everybody. He did not know how right he was. BC finished her shift. She did not cry in the building. She had a rule about that. The building did not get her tears, not one of them, not anymore. She rode the Danfo home in the evening traffic with the envelope in her bag, pressed between a half loaf of bread and her work shoes, and she looked out the window at Lagos going by, the hawkers and the generators and the children selling sachet water between the cars, and she did not let herself think about it until she was home. Home was 3 flights up in a building in Surulaire where the elevator had been broken before she moved in. She climbed the stairs slowly. By, by the third flight, her knees spoke to her, the way they had started to in the last few years, a small grinding complaint that she answered by going slower. She unlocked her door. One room and a corner kitchen, and a window that looked out at the back of another building. But it was clean. It was always clean. Cleaning was the one thing she still had complete power over, so she did it well. She put down her bag. She took the bread and the shoes and the envelope. And then she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and for the first time in a very long time, BC Okoro cried. She cried quietly, the way a person cries when they have learned that crying loudly changes nothing. She cried for the laughing. She cried for the phone pointed at her face. She cried for all the years of being walked past, of being furniture, of being a shadow with a mop. But mostly she cried for the thing underneath all of it, the thing she had buried so deep she sometimes almost believed it was gone. Because BC had not always pushed a cart. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She looked across the small room to the top of her wardrobe, where a wooden box sat under a folded wrapper, gathering dust because she made herself leave it alone. She had not opened it in over a year. Opening it was dangerous. Opening it let the past into the room, and the past did not always leave when you wanted it to. She stood up. She reached up and took the box down. It was heavier than she remembered. She set it on the bed and she sat beside it and she put both hands flat on the lid for a moment. The way you might put your hands on a door you were not sure you wanted to open. Then she opened it. Photographs. That was the first thing. Not photographs of this life. Photographs of another woman entirely. A woman who looked like BC, but stood the way BC no longer stood, with her chin up and her shoulders open and a smile that had never once been swallowed. In one, she wore a blue gown and stood at a podium with a microphone, her mouth open midward, her hand raised. In another, she cut a ribbon in front of a low concrete building with a hand-painted sign that read Okoro Learning Centra, Umahaya. In another, she sat surrounded by children in school uniforms, more children than the frame could hold, all of them laughing at something just out of the shot. BC touched that one. The edge of it was soft from being touched before. Under the photographs was a folder, and in the folder was a certificate, the paper gone yellow at the corners, but the words still there in their formal black ink. This is to certify that the Okoro Foundation was duly registered. And below that, a line that her finger went to without her deciding to move it. Founder and Executive Director, Bisala Okoro. That was her. That had been her. She had grown up in Umuahia, in the southeast, the only daughter of a man named Pius Okoro, who started with one lorry and built a transport business that ran palm oil and cocoa from the villages to the ports. Her father was a serious man with a soft center. He gave away more than he kept. He paid school fees for half the boys in their compound, quietly, never letting their fathers feel small about it. Her mother was a teacher, Miss Grace Okoro, who could silence a classroom of 40 children with one raised eyebrow and who believed completely and without exception that a person's worth had nothing to do with their money. Dignity, her mother used to say, standing in the kitchen with flour on her hands, is not something people give you. It is something you carry, even when nobody believes in you. Especially had carried it. She had gone to university in Enugu. She had come back with a head full of plans and started the foundation with her own savings and her father's blessing, a foundation that paid school fees and built 2 learning centers and put more than 300 children through secondary school in 8 years. She had stood at podiums. She had shaken the hands of governors. She had been, for a while, exactly the kind of person who got invited to weddings at places like the Grand Magnolia, and not as a joke. And then it had all come apart. It came apart because of a man named Chuka. BC closed the box for a moment. Just hearing the name in her own head was enough to make her stomach turn over. She made herself breathe. Then she opened the box again, because the rest of the story was in there too, and she had come this far. Chuka Eze had been her father's prota Iggy, a clever young man from the next town, charming, quick with numbers, the kind of person who remembered your wife's name and your children's ages and asked after them every time. Pius Okoro had loved him like a son. When Pius's health began to fail, it was Chuka he leaned on, Chuka he trusted with the business, Chuka he asked to help BC manage the foundation's accounts, because BC was good with people and programs, but had never pretended to love the figures. That was the mistake. The whole tragedy fit inside that one decision. She had trusted the figures to a man who loved them too much. In the last year of her father's life, Chuka came to BC with papers. He always came with papers. The foundation needed to expand, he said. There was an opportunity, a piece of land in Aba where they could build a vocational school, a real one with workshops and sewing machines and a generator. The bank would lend the money. But the bank needed a guarantor, someone to put their name behind the loan, someone with assets, and BC had assets. The land her father had put in her name, the 2 completed learning centers, her own house, just a formality, Chuka had said, sliding the papers across the table, his pen already uncapped. Standard practice. Your father did it 100 times. You sign as guarantor. The bank releases the funds. We build the school generates income, the loan repays itself. By this time next year, you'll have forgotten you ever signed anything. She had signed. God forgive her, she had signed. She had not read every page because there were 40 pages and she trusted him and her father was dying in the next room and her mind was full of other griefs. She signed where he pointed and she initialed where he pointed and she went back to sitting with her father and she did not think about the figures again. She should have thought about the figures because there was never any school in Aba. There was no land. There was no land. The loan was real, 47 million in naira, and it went into an account BC never saw an out again, into accounts she would spend years failing to trace. And when the bank came looking for its money, the only name they found on the guarantee was hers, Bizola Okoro, signed and initialed on every page, her own hand undeniable. Some of the signatures, she would learn much later, were not even her hand at all. Chuka had needed more documents than she had signed, so he had simply made the rest himself, tracing her name from the real ones, getting good enough at it that even she could not always tell the true from the false. But by the time anyone looked closely, it did not matter whose hand had held the pen. The debt had a name on it, and the name was hers. Her father died 3 weeks after the bank called. He never knew. She was glad of that, at least. She was glad he died believing the foundation was strong and his daughter was safe and the boy he loved like a son was exactly what he seemed. Her mother followed 11 months later. The doctors said it was her heart. BC knew it was grief. You can put grief on a death certificate or not, but it kills people every day, and it killed Grace Okoro slowly over those 11 months while the lawyers circled and the assets were seized one by one, and the name Okokoro turned from a blessing into a warning that people whispered. They took the land. They took the learning centers, which closed, and the children went back to the streets and the farms, and that was the part that hollowed BC out completely. The children, the 300 children she had pulled up and could no longer hold. They took her house, they took the cars, they took in the end everything that had a value the bank could count, and when they were done, there was nothing left of the Okoro Foundation but a yellowed certificate in a wooden box, and a woman with her father's stubborn back and her mother's voice in her head. And Chuka Eze was gone. He had moved, the rumors said, to Lagos. He had reinvented himself. He had walked away from the wreckage clean, with his charm intact and his accounts full, and he had left a dead man's daughter to carry the weight of 47 million naira and two graves. BC had come to Lagos to disappear. It is the easiest city in the world to disappear in. 20 million people, and no one looks twice at a middle-aged woman with a tired face. She took the only work that did not ask for references she could not give, that did not Google her name and find the court records, that did not care who she had been. She cleaned. She cleaned offices, and then she cleaned the offices at Meridian Tower, and she became a shadow, and she let herself believe that the woman in the wooden box was dead and buried with her parents. Now she sat on her narrow bed with the box open in her lap, and she looked at the photograph of herself at the podium, and something that had been lying down inside her for a very long time slowly began to stand up. "They think I am only a janitor," she said out loud to the empty room. Her own voice surprised her. It came out steadier than she expected. "They have no idea who I am." At the very bottom of the box, under the certificate, under the photographs, was a folded letter. She knew the handwriting before she even unfolded it. Round, bold, impatient, the letters leaning forward like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. Kemi. Kemi Balagan had been BC's closest friend from the university days. A fashion design student then, loud and fearless and absolutely certain she was going to be famous. And she had become famous. While BC's world was collapsing, Kemi's was rising. She had built a label that dressed senators' wives and Nollywood stars, a label with a flagship store in Lekki and write-ups in magazines. They had drifted the way people do when one life goes up and the other goes down, and the drifting had been mostly BC's doing because shame is a wall you build yourself, brick by brick, until the people who love you cannot reach you anymore. The letter was 3 years old. Kemi had tracked down her address somehow and written to her, and the letter said many things, but the part BC's eyes always went to was at the end. "If you ever need me," it said, "call me. I do not care what time. I do not care what it is about. I do not care how long it has been. You call me and I will come." That is not a polite thing people say. That is a promise. Do you hear me, Bazola? A promise. BC read it 4 times. Then she picked up her phone, the cheap one with the cracked corner, and she scrolled to a number she had never once dialed, and she sat there with her thumb over it for a long time while the room got dark around her. She thought about the laughing in the lobby. The phone pointed at her face. The marble that cost more than her whole life. Both her lives, if she had children. She had had children. She had had a whole world. She pressed the number. It rang once, twice, a third time. And then a voice she had not heard in years, a little older, a little deeper, but unmistakably, gloriously Kemi. "Hello?" BC opened her mouth and nothing came out. "Hello?" Kemi said again. "Who is this? It's late, oh." "Kemi," BC managed. "Just the name." It cracked in the middle. There was a silence on the line, a long one. BC could hear her own heart in it. "BC?" Kemi's voice had been changed completely. All the impatience gone out of it. "Bisola Okoro, is that you? Tell me that is you. It's me." BC pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. "It's me, Kemi. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it has been so long. I didn't know how to euro. Where are you?" Kemi cut across her, and there was steel in it now. "Don't apologize. Don't you dare waste 1 second apologizing to me. Tell me where you are." "Lagos, Surulere. You've been in Lagos this whole time?" A sound came down the line, something between a laugh and a sob. "All this time. In the same city. Bissy, what happened to you? Where did you go?" And Bisi, sitting in the dark in her one clean room with the wooden box open beside her and her mother's voice in her head and 47 million naira of someone else's lie still sitting on her name, told her the truth. I need help, she said. Not money. I don't want money. I need €1. She stopped. She looked at the photograph of the woman at the podium. I think it's time the world remembered who I am. There was a pause. Tell me everything, Kemi said, from the beginning. I'm not hanging up. I'm not going anywhere. Start talking. So, she did. The next morning, a black Prado pulled up outside BC's building in Surulere, and it did not belong on that street. The children stopped their football to look at it. A woman selling akara from a pan on the corner stood up to see. The car sat there gleaming among the okadas and the danfos like a leopard that had wandered into a goat market, and then the back door opened and Kemi Balagun stepped out. And the street understood that something was happening, even if it did not know what. Kemi looked exactly like her letters. Sunglasses pushed up into a head of short silver gray natural hair that she had clearly decided to wear with pride rather than dye. A linen jumpsuit the color of red earth, gold at her ears and her wrist, the real kind, the kind that does not shout. She stood by the car and looked up at the building, and she found BC standing in the third-floor window, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Kemi took off the sunglasses, and BC saw her old friend's eyes fill, and that was what broke her. She came down the stairs faster than her knees liked, and she came out into the morning light in her faded house wrapper with her hair uncovered, and Kemi met her on the cracked concrete and pulled her in, hard, both arms, the way you hold something you were afraid you had lost for good. Look at you, Kemi said into her shoulder. Her voice was shaking. Look at you. You stubborn, stubborn woman. 3 years. 3 years I've been carrying you around in my chest, not knowing if you were alive. I'm sorry, BC started. I told you. Kemi pulled back and held her by both shoulders and looked at her, properly looked, taking in the gray at her temples and the lines that had not been there, and the hands. She looked at the hands, and her jaw tightened. I told you not to apologize. Come, not here. Let's go up. You're going to make me coffee in that flat I can see is too small for you, and you're going to tell me the whole thing again with the lights on, and then you are going to decide what we are going to do. Up in the one room, Kemi sat on the only chair and BC sat on the bed, and they spread the contents of the wooden box across the thin blanket between them like two generals laying out a map. The photographs, the certificate, the court papers BC had kept, every one of them in a plastic folder gone brittle with age, the original loan agreement, the bank letters, and, most importantly, 3 pages that BC had almost forgotten she had. They were the real ones. The agreements Bisi had actually signed, with Chuka watching, in the room with her dying father next door. She had kept her own copies out of some instinct she could not have explained at the time, some last flicker of the careful woman she used to be. And on those 3 pages, her signature was her true signature, the one she had been making since she was 19, with the particular loop on the B and the way the final A trailed off into nothing because she had always been in a hurry. Why do these matter? Kemi asked, holding one of the pages up to the window light. Because of the others. BC reached into the folder and drew out a second set of papers, photocopies the bank's lawyers had entered into evidence years ago. The bank had 31 documents with my signature. I only ever signed 11. Chuka made the rest. He traced them. He got good at it, but he wasn't perfect. Look, she laid a true page next to a false one. And Kemi, who had spent 30 years training her eye to see the half-millimeter difference between a good seam and a bad one, leaned in close and saw it. The B, Kemi said slowly. The B. BC's voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it now, the edge of the woman in the photographs. On mine, the loop closes every time. It has closed since I was a girl. My mother used to say my B looked like a pregnant woman. On his forgeries, the loop never quite closes. He didn't lift the pen the way I do. He couldn't feel it. It's a small thing. It's the smallest thing in the world. It's not small, Kemi said. It's everything. BC, do you understand what you have here? This is not a sad story in a box. This is evidence. This is a forensic document examiner's afternoon. This is a case. I tried. The edge went out of BC's voice as fast as it had come. She looked down at her hands. 3 years ago, I tried. I went to a lawyer with all of this. And he listened, and he nodded, and then he told me what it would cost to bring a private prosecution, to hire the examiner, to fight a man who had already disappeared into Lagos with my money and bought himself new lawyers and a new name. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. I had 8,000 naira and a cleaning job, so I put it back in the box. She closed her eyes, and I let him win. Every day for 3 years, I let him win. The room was quiet. Outside, the children's football game had started up again, the shouts coming up faint through the window. Kemi sat back in the chair. She was looking at her friend with an expression BC could not quite read, something fierce and sad, and decided all at once. How much? Kemi said. Do you owe the real number? Today, with the interest, the court cost heads they piled on, BC gave a small, broken laugh. 47 million became 61. Last I checked, which was a long time ago, because I stopped being able to bear checking. I will owe that money until I die, Kemi. I have made peace with it. A janitor's salary will never touch 61 million naira. I'll pay what I can, and they'll garnish what they can, and I'll die owing it, and that's the end of the Okoro story. That's how it ends. No, Kemi said. Just that. No, flat and final, the way you'd refuse a price you found insulting. That is not how it ends. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at Surulere, at the rooftops, and the tangle of cables and the smoke of someone's cooking fire. And when she turned back around, she had the look on her face that 30 years ago used to mean she was about to do something that frightened her professors. Listen to me. I have money now. Real money. More than one woman who designs clothes for a living has any business having, and I have it because of a thing your father did that you don't even know about. BC looked up. You don't know this, Kemi said. There's no reason you would. When I was finishing at university, when my own father had just died, and I had no fees for my final year, I went around to everybody, and everybody said, no, a girl studying tailoring. What is the point? And then one day an envelope came to my hostel with my fees in it, all of it. No name. I spent 2 years to find out who did it. It was your father. Pius Okoro paid for my final year and told the bursar to never let me know, and I only found out because the bursar got drunk at a funeral and couldn't keep it in. The room had gone very still. Everything I have built, Kemi said, and her voice was thick now. The store, the label, all of it. It started with a final year that your father paid for and never claimed. So do not, Basola Okoro, do not sit there on that bed and tell me about money. I am not lending you anything. I am paying a debt I have owed your family for 30 years, and you are going to let me, because if you don't, I will be very angry, and you remember what I am like when I am angry. BC remembered. Despite everything, despite the tears that were running freely down her face now, she laughed. And it was a real laugh, the first real laugh in a long time. I remember, she said. Good. Kemi sat back down, all business now, and pulled a slim leather notebook from her bag. So here is what is going to happen. First, the case. I know a woman, Barrister Funky Williams. She is the best. She eats men like Yorkshire for breakfast and uses their bones for toothpicks. We are taking everything in this box to her on Monday. The forgery, the forensic examiner, all of it. That is the long game. That is justice, and justice takes time, and we are going to get it. She tapped her pen on the notebook. But there is also the short game. A slow smile spread across her face, and it was not a kind smile, exactly, but it was a righteous one. Because you, my friend, have been invited to a wedding. BC went still. Kemi, no, this Saturday. At the Grand Magnolia. Kemi, I am not going to that wedding. They invited me to laugh at me. Going would be €1. Going, Kemi said, would be the most magnificent thing you have ever done. She leaned forward, and her eyes were shining. BC, listen to me. These people, this Sadie, this husband of hers, this whole crowd of people who walk past you every day like you're a wall, they have decided who you are. They have looked at the uniform and the cart and the tired face, and they have written your whole story in their heads, and in their version you are nothing. You are a punchline. And on Saturday, they are planning to read that story out loud in front of everyone who matters in this city. She took BC's hand, the cracked, scarred, working hand, and held it in both of hers. So let's give them a different story. Let me dress you, not in a costume, not in a disguise. Let me put you in front of those people looking exactly like who you actually are, which is the most dignified woman I have ever known. And let's see whose story is stronger, theirs or the truth. BC looked at their joined hands. She thought about the marble floor. She thought about Mercy's phone, recording, waiting for her to crumble. She thought about her mother in the kitchen with flour on her hands. Dignity is something you carry, especially when nobody believes in you. I don't have anything to wear, she said. It was the last wall, and it was a weak one, and they both knew it. Kemi smiled. Bizola, she said, dressing people is what I do. Leave that part to me. They spent the rest of that day and most of the next building the case, not the costume. That was the thing Kemi understood that the people at the wedding never would. The dress was the smallest part. The dress was theater. The real work was the box. They photographed every document. They organized the court papers in order. Kemi made calls, lowering her voice and turning slightly away, and the calls produced names, and the names produced appointments. By Friday evening, they had a meeting set with Barrister Funky Williams for the following Monday, and Funke, hearing only the outline of it over the phone, had gone quiet and then said, in the voice of a hunter who has just seen fresh tracks, "Bring me the original signatures. Bring me everything. Do not let that box out of your sight." And only then, with all of that done, did Kemi finally open her sketchbook and turn to the question of the dress. "Tell me something," she said. They were sitting in BC's flat again, the evening light gone gold. "When you walk into that place, when all those eyes turn, how do you want them to see you?" BC thought about it for a long time, long enough that Kemi waited, pen still. "I want them to see," BC said at last, "the woman they tried to erase and could not." Kemi's pen began to move. She did not sketch a gown covered in crystals. That surprised BC, who had braced herself for something that would feel like a disguise. Kemi sketched something quieter and far more dangerous, long, clean lines, deep black silk that would move like water and catch the light only when it wanted to. A single panel of woven asso oak across one shoulder, the old cloth, the cloth of chiefs and grandmothers, in black and antique gold. No glitter, no noise, the kind of clothing that does not ask to be looked at and so cannot be looked away from. "This," Kemi said, turning the sketchbook around, "is not a costume that says I am rich now. Any fool can buy that. This says I was never less than you. There is a difference, and everyone in that room is going to feel it, even if they can't say why." They worked. Kemi brought fabric the next day, the real silk and the asso oak that she said had been woven by a man in Isian whose family had made cloth for 4 generations. She fitted it on BC's body herself, pins in her mouth, kneeling on the floor of the small flat, muttering to herself the way she always had. She brought jewelry from her own collection, not lent, but given. She made that clear. A pair of slim gold drops for the ears and a single heavy ring that had belonged to her grandmother, no necklace. "The neck stays bare," Kemi said. "Bare and straight. Let them look at your face." She did BC's hair herself on the Saturday afternoon, braiding it up and back into a high crown that lifted the whole structure of her face, that gave back the architecture the years of looking down had taken. She did the makeup with a light hand, almost nothing, just enough to bring the eyes forward, and when she was finished, she turned BC toward the small mirror on the back of the wardrobe door, the only mirror in the flat, and she stood behind her, and the two of them looked. BC did not recognize herself at first. That was the truth of it. For 1 second, she looked at the woman in the mirror as a stranger. And the stranger was magnificent, tall and still and certain, with a face that had suffered and not been defeated by it. And then she realized the stranger was her, had always been her, had been waiting under the uniform and the swallowed words for 3 years, and Bisi's eyes filled. Don't! Kemi said sharply, gripping her shoulders. Do not cry. You will ruin both of our work, and I did not braid this hair for 45 minutes to watch you cry it out. There will be time to cry later. Tonight, you are made of stone. Beautiful stone. Do you hear me? Bisi looked at herself in the mirror, and the woman in the mirror looked back, and slowly, the chin came up. I hear you, she said. When you walk into that place, Kemi said, soft now, her chin resting for a moment on Bisi's shoulder so that their two faces were side by side in the glass. They will be expecting a janitor. They will be expecting a fool in a borrowed dress, and instead they are going to get you, the real you, the one your mother raised. Walk in like the floor is grateful, Bisi, because for once it should be. The Grand Magnolia Estate sat on the mainland side of the lagoon behind a wall the length of a city street, and on the evening of the wedding it was lit like something out of a dream that money had paid for. Strings of warm light hung in the old trees. White flowers everywhere, thousands of them, banked along the paths and spilling from urns taller than a man. A live band under a canopy. Waiters in white gloves moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. Real champagne. The kind with the French name, people said carefully to make sure you heard them say it. And the guests. The guests were Lagos at its most gold-plated. Oil money and bank money and politics money. The women in gowns that cost a teacher's yearly salary. The men in agbada so heavily embroidered they moved like they were wearing armor, which, in a way, they were. Senators, a former governor, two Nollywood actors who arrived 20 minutes apart so that each could have their own moment at the gate. The kind of crowd that exists to be seen by itself. At the center of it stood Sade. She was, it had to be admitted, beautiful that night. Her gown was white and enormous and beaded to the point of weaponry, and she stood in the middle of all of it, turning slowly for the photographers, accepting the looks the way a queen accepts tribute. Beside her, less interested, scrolling something on a phone he kept half hidden against his thigh, stood Dare Adeyemi, the groom, the man whose name was on Meridian Tower. He was handsome in the bored way of men who have never had to try. He had married Sade for reasons that were probably very clear to him and were frankly nobody's business, and he was already on his own wedding night looking like a man. Counting the hours. Joy leaned towards Sade. Do you think she'll actually come? Sade laughed, that bright, cold laugh, and rolled her eyes. That woman? Come here? Please. She took one look at the words black tie and went and hid under her bed. She knows her level. I would put money on it. She is at home right now in her uniform, eating Gary, thanking God she had the sense not to embarrass herself. She lifted a glass of champagne to her own joke. Honestly, it's almost a shame. I had a whole plan. Tell us, Mercy said, leaning in, phone already half out. You'll see, Sade said, if she comes, which she won't. And it was exactly then, as Sade was lowering her champagne glass and turning back to the cameras, that the band stumbled. It was a small thing. The saxophone player simply forgot to come in. He had been looking toward the entrance, and what he saw there made him miss his cue, and the missed cue rippled through the rest of the band, and the music thinned and faltered, and a few heads turned to see why, and then a few more, and then, the way a wind moves across a field of grass, the whole crowd turned to look at the gate. A car had stopped at the entrance. Black, unhurried. Not the flashiest car in a driveway full of flash, which was somehow the point. The driver came around and opened the back door. A shoe came out first, black, plain, a heel high enough to mean business and no higher. Then the woman, rising out of the car in one smooth motion that betrayed no effort at all, and the black silk fell into place around her like water finding its level, and the gold of the asso oak caught the warm light from the trees, just once, just enough. She straightened. She did not look around. She did not search the crowd for approval, or for the host, or for a familiar face. She simply turned toward the lit path between the white flowers and began to walk, the way a person walks into a room that they have decided in advance belongs to them. The champagne glasses stopped halfway to a dozen mouths. A waiter froze with his tray tilting. The photographer who had been shooting Sade slowly lowered his camera and forgot entirely that he was being paid. And Sade turned around. She turned because she felt the attention leave her, felt it physically, the way you feel a cloud cross the sun, and she turned to see where it had gone, and she saw the woman in black coming up the path, and for one long, terrible second, she did not recognize her. Then she did. The champagne glass in Sadie's hand did not fall, but her fingers loosened around it, and a little of it spilled over the rim and ran down the back of her hand, and she did not notice, because all the blood had gone somewhere else, somewhere it was needed more. No, Sade whispered, just to herself, just under her breath. No, that's not a euro, BC walked. She did not hurry. She had learned, in 3 years of being invisible, exactly how slowly you can move before people start to wonder what you know that they don't. The white path was lined with light and flowers, and 1,000 naira of imported petals underfoot, and she walked up the center of it with her bare neck and her crowned hair and her chin level. And the whole glittering crowd of Lagos turned to watch her come, and not one of them, not one, knew who she was. The whispers started. Who is that? Is she a senator's wife? She has to be somebody. That cloth. Look at that cloth. That's not from any shop. That's family cloth. I feel like I should know her. She carries herself like old money, the real kind, the kind that doesn't talk. Dare Adeyemi looked up from his phone. He looked up because the silence had finally reached even him, and he turned to see what could possibly have quieted his own wedding, and he saw the woman in black, and the phone in his hand was suddenly forgotten. He stared. He had the dim sense, common to men who have walked past 1,000 cleaners, that he had seen this face somewhere, but he could not place it, because he had only ever seen it looking down. BC reached the center of the courtyard, the open space before the canopy where the band had been playing, and she stopped. She let them look. She stood in the warm light, with the flowers banked around her, and several hundred of the most important people in Lagos staring at her, and she felt, rising up through all the years of being a shadow, the old steadiness coming back into her spine, like the tide coming in. Sade moved toward her. She had to. She was the bride, the host, and the entire crowd was now watching this stranger that no one could identify. And Sade was a creature of attention, and attention was leaving her. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She walked toward the center and claimed it, with a smile pasted across her face so tightly you could see the effort of it. Wow, Sade said, and her voice came out almost right, almost steady. What a surprise! Seeing you here. The crowd's whispers redoubled. They knew her then. The bride knew this woman. Who was she? You really did dress up. Sade's eyes moved down the black silk and back up, and she put a little laugh under the words, the old cruelty trying to find its footing on ground that had shifted. I almost didn't recognize you. Beatsy looked at her. She looked at Sadie the way you look at whether you have already survived. Yes, she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The whole courtyard had gone so quiet that it carried to the back. I did. A beat. Then she let her own gaze travel down the enormous beaded gown and back up to Sadie's face, slow, unbothered, and she said, quietly, almost kindly, and looking at you, I'd say you dressed up too. She paused. The pause was a held breath. Several hundred people leaned in. Shame, BC said, softly, that all this money still couldn't buy you class. The gasp moved through the crowd like wind through dree grass. Somebody laughed a short, shocked bark and cut it off. Stade's face went a deep, blotched red under the makeup. Her hand tightened on the bouquet until the stems bent. She opened her mouth to fire back, because firing back was what she did, and she found, for the first time in her gilded life, that there was nothing in the chamber. And that was the moment an old man stepped out of the crowd. He was old enough that the crowd made room for him without being asked. Gray hair cut close, a simple dark agbada with no embroidery at all, which on that night, in that crowd, marked him as either nobody or somebody so secure he had nothing to prove. He came forward slowly, leaning on a carved walking stick, and he stopped a few feet from Bisi and peered at her face with his head tilted, the way the old look at something they are not sure their eyes can be trusted about. His free hand rose slowly to his mouth. "Wait," he said, his voice cracked. "Wait, is that A Euro? Is that Bisola Okoro?"
The name landed in the courtyards like a stone in still water.
The whole place went silent, truly silent this time, not the hushed of a quiet of a crowd that has sensed something is about to happen and does not want to miss it. The band had long stopped. Even the waiters had stopped. Somewhere a generator hummed, and that was the only sound. BC turned her head and looked at the old man. And something moved across her face, the first crack in the stone all night, because she knew him. She had not known she would, but she did. It took her a moment, peeling back the years, and then she had it. "Chief Nwosu," she said softly. The old man's face crumpled. "My God," he whispered. "My God, it is. It is you." He took a step closer, both hands on his stick now to hold himself up. "Child, Basola, I worked with your father, Pius Okoro. I sat on the board of your foundation, the Okoro Foundation, for 6 years. You a Euro, you were the face of it. You stood at the opening of the Umuahia Center, and you gave a speech that made grown men weep. I was there, I wept. His old eyes were wet. Where in God's name have you been? We thought a Euro when everything happened. When your parents passed, you vanished. We looked for you. Some of us looked for you for a long time. Where did you go?" Around the courtyard, the whispers had become a low roar, held just under the surface.
"The Okoro Foundation."
Someone breathed.
Did he say Okoro?
My cousin went to school on an Okoro scholarship in Abia. She's. That's the woman? That's her? I thought she was dead. There were stories a Euros. No way. The cleaning woman from Meridian? My husband's office is in that building a Euros. Sade stood frozen at the edge of it all, the bouquet crushed in her two hands, and she watched the ground shift under her wedding, the way you watch a wave come in faster than you thought it would. The truth was arriving in pieces all around her, and she was assembling it against her will. The woman she had invited to mock, the janitor, the shadow with the mop, the Okoro Foundation. The name that, she now dimly remembered, her own mother had once spoken with respect, before Sade was anybody, before the money, when scholarships were the kind of thing that mattered to people like the people. Sade had spent 10 years pretending she had never been. "No," Sade said very quietly to no one. The color was gone from her face entirely now. "No, no, no." BC took Chief Nwosu's outstretched hand in both of hers. The old man was trembling. "I'm here, Chief," she said gently. "I didn't go far. I went where people go when they have lost everything and need to not be seen. Life took me somewhere I never planned, but there is one thing life did not take." Her voice was steady, and it carried to the back of that silent garden. "It did not take who I am." And then, into that silence, a different thing happened. A man near the front of the crowd, a guest, well-dressed, a glass of champagne in his hand, took one step backward, just one. A small movement, but BC's eyes, sweeping the crowd, caught it, because it was the movement of a man trying to become invisible, and she was the world's leading expert on what that looked like. She turned her head, and she found his face. The years had been good to him. That was the first, strange thought. He was heavier than he had been, prosperous, in a fine gray agbada, with a gold watch, and the soft, confident face of a man who had paid for his sins by simply outliving the memory of them. He had been laughing 2 minutes ago. He had been one of the crowd, a friend of the groom, a business associate, a guest at the wedding of Dare Adeyemi, because men like Dare and men like him moved in the same waters now. Chuka Ize. For 3 years BZ had imagined this. She had imagined it in the Danfo and over the mop and at night in her one room. She had imagined screaming. She had imagined her hands around his throat. She had imagined the words she would say, the long, scalding paragraphs of them. And now, here he was, 10 feet away, frozen in the act of stepping backward with a champagne glass in his hand, and she found that she did not want to scream at all. She wanted something better than screaming. Chuka, she said. His name in her mouth went across the courtyard like a current. He flinched at it. The champagne glass shook in his hand. Bisola, he said. He tried to smile. The charm was still in there somewhere. She could see him reaching for it. The old gift, the thing that had fooled her father and the bank and everyone. Bisola Okoro, after all these years. You look a euro. You look wonderful. You look well. I a euro. You took everything from me, BC said. She did not raise her voice. That was the thing that made the whole garden lean in. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. You took my father's land. You took the learning centers. You took the houses, the cars, my mother's peace. You took her life, Chuka. She died of what you did. You may as well have a euro. She stopped. She breathed. The stone came back into her. 300 children went back to the streets because of the documents you forged with my name. And then you came to Lagos and you bought a watch. The crowd's roar had died completely. Dare Adeyemi, the forgotten groom, had come forward to the front of his own crowd, and he was looking from Bisi to Chuka and back with a slow, terrible understanding dawning across his bored, handsome face, because Chuka Eze was not just a guest. Chuka Eze Dare was now remembering the man he had been about to sign a 40 million naira joint venture with on Monday. The smooth one. The one with the papers. This is a euro. This woman is unwell, Chuka said. And now he raised his voice. Now he turned to the crowd, spreading his hands, the charm cranking up into something desperate. I am so sorry. This is very sad. I knew her family long ago. There was a financial matter. Business is business. She has clearly never recovered. She has been a euro. Look at her. She has been telling people she is a cleaner a euro. She is a cleaner. It was a new voice. Kemi's. She had come up through the crowd and now stood beside Bisi, and she was holding a slim leather folder, and her voice was loud and clear and absolutely without mercy. She has cleaned the floors of Meridian Tower for 3 years, Kemi said, because this man, Chuka Eze, forged her signature on bank guarantees, defaulted on a loan he took in her name, and let her carry 61 million naira of debt for a school that was never built. And we can prove it. She opened the folder. I have here, Kemi said, holding the pages up so the light caught them, certified copies of the 3 loan documents Bisola Okoro actually signed, and copies of the 20 other documents she did not. The signatures do not match. They are close. He was good. But on every forgery, the loop on the letter B fails to close, because Chuka Eze never learned that Bisola Okoro has closed that loop since she was 19 years old. She turned to the crowd and her voice rang. On Monday morning, these documents go to Barrister Funka Williams and to a forensic handwriting examiner registered with the courts. There is a name for what this man did. It is called forgery, and it is called obtaining by false pretenses, and in this country it carries years behind bars, not a wedding invitation. The silence broke, not into noise, but into movement. 100 small movements, people turning to one another, hands rising to mouths. The well-dressed crowd of Lagos, suddenly looking at the prosperous man in the gray agbada the way you look at something that has crawled out from under a stone in your garden. Chuka's face had gone gray to match. He looked at the folder. He looked at the faces all around him, the faces that had been his friends and his marks and his future, all of them now staring, and you could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the old quick mind that had always found the angle, looking now and finding none. You can't, he started. Those are a euro. You have no a euro. Dare, Chief Nwosu said quietly, turning to the groom. Adeyemi, were you not about to go into business with this man? Dare Adeyemi looked at Chuka Eze for a long moment. Then he looked at Bisi, the woman from his own building, the woman he had walked past 100 times and never once seen, standing in black silk with her bare neck straight and her chin level, telling the truth in front of all of Lagos. I was, Dare said. His voice had lost all its boredom. It had gone cold and flat and dangerous. I am not anymore. What happened to Chuka Ize after that happened quickly and quietly, the way these things do when a man's protection is the goodwill of important people, and that goodwill evaporates in a single evening. He did not stay for the cake. Nobody walked him out. He simply turned somewhere in the rising murmur and was gone, leaving his champagne glass on the white cloth of a serving table, and the space where he had stood closed over like water. But Bisi was not watching him go. She had stopped caring about Chuka the moment she had said her piece, and that, more than anything, was the measure of how far she had come. The screaming woman she had imagined for 3 years would have followed him to the gate. The woman in the black silk let him walk into the dark and turned instead to the bride. Said had not moved. She stood at the edge of the courtyard in her enormous white gown, with the bouquet crushed in her hands, and she was no longer the center of anything. The cameras had turned away from her. The guests had turned away from her. Her own husband had stepped to the front of the crowd and was looking not at her, but at the cleaning woman she had invited as a joke. And Sadie, who had built her entire self out of being looked at, was experiencing, perhaps for the first time in her life, what it felt like to be a shadow. Why? Sade said. Her voice was small and cracked and ugly, with something that might have been the beginning of shame. Why are you here? You were supposed to a euro. She stopped. Even she could hear how it would sound to finish the sentence. I was supposed to be the joke, BC said. Yes, I know. She walked toward Sade. Slowly, the crowd parted for her, and she came to a stop in front of the younger woman. And for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other, the bride in white and the cleaner in black, and the whole garden held its breath, waiting for the cleaner to take her revenge. She did not take it. You wanted to humiliate me in front of all these people, BC said. Her voice was quiet, meant for Sade, though in that silence everyone heard it. And for a while, on the day you gave me that envelope, you succeeded. I went home and I cried. I want you to know that. You hurt me. A grown woman, and you sent me home crying like a child. So do not tell yourself it was harmless. It was not harmless. It is never harmless. Sadie's eyes had filled. She blinked, furious at herself, and a tear went down through the makeup anyway. But I did not come here for revenge, BC went on. I could have. I had the words. I had 3 years of words saved up for this exact night, and I am standing here looking at you, and I find I don't want to spend a single one of them on you. Because here is the thing you don't understand yet, and I hope, for your sake, you understand it before you are my age. She leaned in slightly, and her voice dropped, and it was almost gentle. Dignity is not something you take from another person. It is not a thing you win by making someone else small. Every time you made me feel like nothing, you were not adding to yourself. You were subtracting. You have been subtracting for years, and you are about to find out exactly how little is left. She straightened. I did not come to ruin your wedding, she said, louder now, for the room. Your wedding ruined itself the moment you decided that a person who cleans floors is worth less than a person who owns them. I only came to remind you, and to remind everyone standing here, of something my mother told me when I was a girl. She let her eyes move across the crowd, face by face, the senators and the oilmen and the actors and the waiters in their white gloves who had frozen at the edges of it all. We are not what we own. We are not the names on our buildings or the cars in our driveways or the cost of the floor we are standing on. We are how we treat the people who can do nothing for us. That is the whole of it. That is the only measure that has ever mattered. The rest is just decoration. For a moment, nothing happened. The garden was utterly still. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was a waiter. a young man in white gloves who had stood at the edge of that wedding all night, being invisible, carrying trays for people who did not see him. And now he was clapping, slowly his eyes wet, not caring who saw. And then another person joined him, an older woman in a quiet gown who had a cousin who was a nurse because of an Okoro scholarship. And then Chief Nwosu, both his old hands coming together, and then it spread, the way fire spreads, person to person across the whole garden, until the entire crowd of gilded Lagos was on its feet, applauding a woman in black silk, and some of them were weeping, and some of them were looking, for the first time all evening, at the waiters and the cleaners and the drivers at the edges of their own party, and beginning, just beginning, to see them. Sade could not bear it. Her face twisted. She turned, and she pushed through the crowd toward the house, and the bouquet fell from her hands and scattered its white flowers across the path, and she did not stop to pick them up. She ran from her own wedding, from her own name, into a darkness that had nothing to do with the night. Dare Adeyemi watched his wife go. He did not follow her. He turned back to Bisi, and the bored, handsome man was gone, and in his place was someone humbler and more uncertain, a man who had just watched his own life and found it wanting. I walked past you, he said. His voice was low. Every day, for 3 years, in my own building, and I never once a euro. He stopped. He shook his head. I am sorry. That is not enough. I know it is not enough, but I am sorry. If I had known a euro, Bisi lifted her hand gently and stopped him. You did not need to know who I used to be in order to treat me like a person, she said. There was no cruelty in it. It was almost kind, and that made it land harder. That is the lesson, Mr. Adeyemi, not that the cleaner turned out to be somebody. The lesson is that she was always somebody. So was the man you replaced last year. So is the woman who serves your coffee. So is every person you have walked past with your eyes on your phone. She looked at him steadily. The next cleaner in your building will not be a secret heiress. She will just be a woman who needs the work. Treat her like she matters anyway. That is the only thing you can do now that would mean anything. Dare Adeyemi was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and lowered his eyes, and it was the nod of a man taking something heavy and deciding to carry it instead of putting it down. Bisi turned to leave, but before she could, a man stepped out of the crowd, a businessman she half recognized from the newspapers, and he said, in a voice that was not entirely steady,
Madam Okoro.
the foundation.
Huh.
The Okoro.
Found it.
Is it a euro? Could it be brought back?
Huh.
Bisi stopped. My company would support it, the man said. Properly. I mean it. Not a photo and a handshake. Real support. The work your family did to change this region. My own driver's children, euros. He stopped, and his jaw worked. I would consider it an honor. Mine, too, a woman said quickly, stepping forward. Count us in, and mine. It moved through the crowd like the applause had, one voice and then another, hands raised, promises made in the open, where promises made in the open are hard to take back, and Bisi stood in the center of it with her crowned hair and her bare straight neck and felt something she had not felt in 3 years, something she had been certain was dead and buried in Umuahia with her parents. She felt hope. Maybe, she said, and her voice caught. Just once, the stone giving way at last. Maybe it is time. She looked up, past the lights strung in the old trees, past the white flowers, up into the dark Lagos sky, where a few stars were strong enough to be seen over the city's glow, and for just a moment she was not in that garden at all. She was in a kitchen in Umuahia, with flour in the air, and her mother's voice telling her what dignity was. She was at a podium with 300 children laughing at something, just out of the frame. She was every version of herself that had ever been told she was nothing, and had carried herself anyway.
I'm still here.
She told them, the ones who could no longer hear her.
You hear me? I'm still here.
And I am not finished. When she finally turned to walk out, the crowd moved aside for her. But it was not the way they had moved aside for her in the lobby of Meridian Tower, stepping back from a shadow with a mop. They moved aside the way people move for someone they have decided to honor. They opened a path, and they were quiet. and more than one of them inclined their head as she passed, because that was what she looked like walking down that white path between the fallen flowers. Not a janitor, not a victim, a woman who had been knocked all the way down and had never, not for one single day, agreed to stay there. Kemi was waiting by the car, arms folded, leaning on the door, a slow, knowing smile on her face that she was not even trying to hide. "So," she said, lifting an eyebrow as BC came down the path, "was it enough?" BC looked back once at the grand magnolia, at the lights and the flowers and the chandeliers hung in the trees, at all the expensive, beautiful things that had been built to make people like her feel small. They did not look so grand now. They looked like what they were: pretty, empty, a lot of money spent to avoid the only question that ever mattered. She turned back to her friend, and she took a breath that felt like the first full breath she had taken in 3 years, a breath that tasted like the open road. "No," she said, "it's not enough. This is just the beginning." Kemi laughed and reached out and took her hand, the cracked, scarred, working hand, and held it tight. "Damn right it is," she said. "Now get in the car. We have 300 children to find, and a forgery case to win, and a foundation to bring back from the dead. And you, my friend, are going to need a proper dress for every single day of it." The Prado pulled away from the estate into the warm Lagos night. Behind them, the lights of the Magnolia grew small and then were gone. BC sat by the window and watched the city come up around them again, the hawkers and the headlights and the children selling sachet water between the lanes, all the ordinary invisible people of Lagos. And she did not look through a single one of them. She looked at all of them. She had spent 3 years being one of them, and she would never again be able to look through a person as though they were furniture. And that, she understood now, was the one gift the whole long disaster had given her. In the dark glass of the window, she could see her own reflection laid over the passing city. Not a janitor, not a broken woman, not a shadow. A woman who had been knocked down and had never once been lost. A woman wearing a crown that no one had given her, and that no one, ever again, was going to be allowed to take. They found the forensic examiner. They found Barrister Funke Williams, who took one look at the loop of the letter B and smiled the way a surgeon smiles before a procedure she knows she will win. It took 18 months. It is not a story that ends with a single clean evening, because real things never do. There were court dates and adjournments, and one terrible week when it looked as though Chuka's new lawyers might find a way to bury it again. But the documents did not lie, and the loop of the B did not lie, and in the end, a judge in Lagos said the words Bisola Okoro had waited 3 years to hear, and the debt that had been hung around her neck was lifted off it and set where it had always belonged, on the man who had forged it. The Okoro Foundation reopened on a Tuesday in the dry season, in a rented hall in Surulere, with 30 children in the first intake and a line of parents out the door. BC stood at the front of the room, not in black silk this time, but in an ordinary blue dress, and she gave a speech, and Chief Nwosu was there in the second row, and he wept the way he had wept all those years ago, and this time so did half the room. She did not become rich again. That is worth saying plainly, because the story would be a lie otherwise. She never recovered her father's land or the houses or the cars, and she did not want to. She lived in a slightly larger flat, with a window that got the morning light, and she ran the foundation. And on the day they opened the second new learning center, she hired, as the head of its cleaning staff, a tired woman named Patience, who had been pushing a cart in an office tower for 9 years, and whom nobody had ever once asked about her life. That is where her story turns into yours, because the lesson of this is not that the cleaner was secretly a queen. That is the easy version, the comfortable version, the one that lets everyone off the hook. The hard version, the true one, is this: she was a queen the whole time, and so is the next one, and so is the one after that, and almost none of them are hiding a foundation in a wooden box. Most of them are just exactly what they appear to be, which is people carrying lives you cannot see, deserving of the same respect, whether or not there is ever a reveal. The woman who serves your coffee, the man who guards your gate, the one emptying the bin you walked past without looking. You will almost never find out who they really are. Treat them like it matters anyway. That is the whole of it. That is the only measure that has ever mattered. The rest is just decoration. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life whom the world has decided not to see, do this one thing tomorrow. Look at them. Say their name. Ask them one real question. It costs nothing, and it is the entire point. And if you believe in stories that give a voice to the people the world walks past, subscribe and tell us in the comments the name of one person you are going to look at differently tomorrow. We read them, every single one. A note before you go. The mechanisms in this story are real things that happen to real families every day in this country. People are talked into standing as guarantors for loans they do not understand. Signatures get forged on documents people never read. Whole inheritances vanish because someone trusted the wrong charming person with the figures and never kept their own copies. If any part of this story made you think about your own family, your own land, your own name on someone else's paper, please do not act on what you heard in a YouTube story. Sit down with a licensed lawyer and keep certified copies of anything you sign, because in the end it was BC's own kept copies that saved her. In Nigeria, financial crimes like forgery and obtaining by false pretenses can be reported to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, through their Eagle Eye app, by email at info.efcc.gov.ng, or through any of their state offices. I am not a lawyer, and nothing in this story is legal advice. I am only someone who has watched, in my own family and others, how quietly a person's whole life can be signed away, and how much of it comes down to one thing nobody teaches us: read before you sign, and keep your copies.